All right, three, two, one, let's begin.
Yep.
Hi, Padma. Padma, should I call you Padma or Priya? I'm
Call me
always
Padma.
confused.
It's fine. Either
Okay,
way works.
all right, great. Um, I'm delighted to see Padma for a number of reasons. First of all, it's been ages actually that we've met face to face. The last time we met was on some panel discussion,
Yeah.
I think last year, during the first phase, I think, of the pandemic. Padma is somebody that I have been a fan and admirer for many years. She's the founder and the sort of brains behind Suno India, which is one of India's pioneering audio storytelling and podcasting platforms. Full disclosure, I am a subscriber, very proud subscriber and supporter of Suno India. And Padma, I don't know whether she's proud, but she supports Sanity.
Absolutely proud supporter of Sanity. Thank you so much, Tanmoy, for having me.
Thank you.
And I'm glad we're finally making this conversation happen.
Yes, and I wish we were here to talk about a happier subject than what we are going to, but I think it's incredibly important to talk about this. And I'll let Padma tell you more about the subject, but I'll give you a little teaser. Padma is now a two-time survivor of COVID, and she has gone on a really, really wild and very painful journey of, well, if we could use the word recovery. She's still she has quite a story to tell of navigating the medical system and dealing with this very mysterious afterlife of the illness that very few people talk about. And she has been writing a lot, and we've been having these conversations off and on about this phenomenon of medical gaslighting, which is what happens when you are confronted with symptoms that medical science does not have any answers to. And as we know, COVID has is showering such symptoms on many of us that have completely stumped the medical system. But I think what Padma's story hopefully will communicate to anybody from the medical fraternity listening is that it's probably not so important to have answers to everything. We understand that medical science has its limitations, but the utter lack of empathy sometimes in the system is really what gets to people and makes the process even more harrowing and painful. Padma, thank you for taking the time. I know it's been a very difficult time for you. I just want to zoom out a little bit and maybe tell me a little bit about the first time that you caught the bug last year.
Right.
Just before that, when stories were coming out of people getting infected, etc., and I'm sure you were watching and reading. What were your first assumptions or impressions about this illness? And did you at that time imagine that COVID can have an afterlife of this nature or of any nature?
Yeah. I mean, when it was playing out, I was really concerned from a very, I've been working in the public health system, in the public health space for a long time. I've also been a health journalist. So when the pandemic was announced, I was really concerned that if the country's health system would be able to cope. And as we've seen that it has not been able to cope. We saw that in the second wave. But when that happened when the news of this new viral illness broke, in fact, I still remember mom and I had just landed in Dubai after a really short, nice trip to Europe, which I did with my mom. I had gone on professional reasons, but then we turned it into a personal vacation of sorts. And I remember reading about it and telling my mom, oh, there's some new virus and it's apparently spreading pretty quickly. And this was in January of 2020, January 2020. And I remember telling my mom, I just hope it doesn't hit India because it'll be pretty bad. We will not be able to cope. And, in February, I think I did the first story around this. I spoke to a leading virologist to just understand, how well prepared we are as a country and so on. So I was actually just looking at it from more a journalistic point of view. What does this actually mean for our resources and so on? And I don't think I ever thought I would catch it because I think from March onwards, we started becoming super careful. We stopped going outside. We were on the hyper vigilant state of sanitizing because we have a young kid at home. And we were at all costs, we need to protect her. So when I got it, I think the challenge, in fact, started with getting the test because we were in the middle of a national lockdown. None of the private laboratories were still open. None of the private hospitals were still open. This was bang in April 2020. And I got a severe headache, a very, very bad headache. and slight fever, and I didn't want to risk it. Even, it could have been a normal viral, but I just didn't want to risk it. So I immediately isolated myself. Though, initially people are like, oh, maybe, how would you get it? You barely stepped out. And I was like, I can't take chances because, we were still getting groceries from outside and so on and so forth. And I think just getting the test was really, really painful. I think my story starts from there.
So you finally managed to get the test, and then what happened? Were you immediately?
I finally got the test, and I also got the test because I wrote a Twitter thread saying how I had to go. I went to get a test, and I was completely dismissed by saying that you're just 30 odd something years. So even if you get COVID, nothing will happen to you. You won't die. So just go back home. And by then I was having high fever and I was coughing up. And I still remember this so vividly. This was at the government hospital here in Hyderabad, and there was a pregnant woman in front of me. She was 7 months pregnant, and her doctor had asked her to get a COVID test to get like the scan done. And this person turned her away too. And she had symptoms, like she had legit symptoms, like, she was breathing heavily. She had a fever. Her eyes were bloodshot red. And they turned her away. And I was right behind her. And I was like, there's no way they're going to give me a test if this pregnant woman is not getting a test. And that's what happened. And then I came and I wrote about that experience on Twitter. And for whatever reason, it just went viral. And then I got a call immediately from the hospital by evening saying, please come, we'll give you the test. And I was like, how are you changing guidelines now? Just because I wrote something on Twitter, like, there's so many things there, right? Like the whole point of privilege and everything. And anyway, I got the test. I was in the hospital. And they said that the test was negative, but then they referred me to another government hospital. And I go there and the pulmonologist tells me then that I have pneumonia in the lungs. I have viral pneumonia. And he told me, you're clinically positive, you have COVID, please go home and isolate yourself. So they didn't really tell me how I was supposed to navigate this. They just told me, take these antibiotics and, deal with it yourself. So 21 days, I was isolated. I had fever, which lasted 15 days. And I had a doctor friend who was actually helping me through. He was in Bombay working in a COVID ward. So he's a chest physician, Sarthak. So he was the one who was actually checking in on me, tell me what I need to do, how I need to keep track of my SpO2. Because again, remember, this is the first wave. None of us were so aware of like, okay, what are all the things that we need to keep track of? And there was no way I was going to get admission in the hospital. So I had to deal with it on my own. So we sent our kid to my mother's place, and Rakesh was basically taking care, leaving food outside. And I think it was really nerve wracking. The isolation part of it was just horrifying for me. But I sailed through. And then I thought, okay, ho gaya, and it was May end by the time I felt a bit better. And I was like, okay, I'll resume work. So in June, I resumed work essentially.
Right. And then did you think that you had sort of put this behind you? And
I mean, I was having trouble sleeping, like severe insomnia, but then I had previously also insomnia, so I thought it was some way connected.
Right.
Then I started having this bizarre symptom of like palpitations. I would feel like my heart rate was going up. So then I got myself a smartwatch just to make sure that I wasn't imagining this, literally. I mean, you also gaslight yourself. So that was what was happening. I was like, oh, maybe this is just me feeling anxious. And then I would see that when I'm sitting, my heart rate was spiking. Suddenly it would go to like 130, 150. I would be doing nothing, but it would be like I'm running a marathon. I would get shortness of breath. And this continued all through June, and I had severe fatigue. And the doctors were saying, there are like post-viral fatigue is normal. Don't worry about it. Just keep eating healthy. Don't push yourself for exercise if you can't. So I thought, okay, I'll get better. And I frankly did feel better. I did work for a bit of June. In fact, I did work in June. And then I think July was when the first crash, I would call it crash in terms of my health happened, where I had gone down to get vegetables and I passed out. I suddenly felt my heart like speed up and started sweating badly, and I completely blacked out, and I hit my head to the near the lift. I hit my head to the tiles near the lift. And because it was COVID, people were scared to even help me. So they ran up and called my husband, and we rushed to the hospital, and then the BP was low. So then they said, oh, it's probably is like a one-off thing. Don't worry about it. And then it just continued. It just kept happening like over the month, like multiple times, especially when I would change position. And that's when I first for the first time, I contacted a cardiologist because that's when the literature started trickling in saying that, it leaves inflammation, it can affect your heart, and it affects your lungs. So I was like, let me be on the safe side, and I contacted a cardiologist. And the cardiologist asked me to get like an ECG and everything, and it was all normal. And then she said, you have anxiety, so take these pills, take these vitamin supplements, you'll be fine. Right. And I was like, this is not anxiety. Like, I know what anxiety feels like. I know what an anxiety attack feels like. I have anxiety. So I think that's where it started. And I literally had to advocate for myself. And I told her, like, if you were in my position and if you were passing out every time you stood up or every time you tried to do something, wouldn't you feel anxious? Like, I literally had to put the question back to her. And then I said, is there any other test that you can do? And then she said, yeah, we can do this 24-hour ECG. It's called a Holter test. Get it done. And I got it done. And the report basically showed like some abnormality where there were like 163 times there were spikes. And she was asking me, were you exercising at that time? I said, no, I wasn't doing anything. And this is precisely what I'm trying to tell you. But she didn't do much. She just put me on vitamin supplements, asked me to drink a lot of water, rest, sleep. And I was like, something's off here. Like, but I was like, okay, she's a doctor. She's saying everything's clear. She's saying my heart is clear. So I took her advice and I did what she asked me to do. But I didn't see any improvement. And in fact, it was getting worse. Like the brain fog was there. It was very severe. I was unable to focus on anything. I pretty much could not get up from the bed. I would have strange pain in the chest, which would come and go. And they had no answers. And every answer would come back to anxiety,
Yeah, I think, this palpitation issue is something that I have been grappling with after I got it earlier this year.
Yeah.
Just as you described, I've been measuring my heart rate and, my resting heart rate, and sometimes it's really high.
Yeah.
And I can't climb a flight of stairs without panting.
Same.
So I went and got a battery of tests last week. And I was lying on the sort of bed, the examination table. And the doctor who was performing the echo on me was again using the same sort of language of anxiety. Why are you so anxious? Why are you journalists so anxious? Isn't it your job to make us anxious? I was like, if this is your way of comforting me, it's not working.
It's not working.
And then after the doctor had left the room, the assistant who was helping her told me the load in the cardiology department in this hospital has increased at least by a factor of 10 after the pandemic. And he said, people are coming with these unexplained palpitations, racing heart, and, we're just not able to. And he actually gave me a very evocative description. He said, COVID ne andar jaal phaila rakha hai. So he said it's literally like a web that it has spun around.
Oh, that's absolutely right. I think how he's saying it is absolutely right. And it is not inexplicable. I think there is enough research, there's enough studies on why this happens. It's basically what is happening is that the autonomic nervous system, which controls our breathing, our blood pressure, our heart rate, our, bowel movement, all of that, they're all independent. They're autonomous. That's why it's autonomous nervous system. It gets destabilized because of the COVID virus. So it freezes it's what my internal medicine specialist finally told me in September of 2020 is that the body gets stuck in the fight and flight mode, and it still thinks that it is fighting. And the research is still coming in, but the belief is that the COVID virus is leaving reservoirs behind in different organs of the body. I mean, there are now 200 symptoms that have been identified. Yeah, there are now 200 symptoms that have been identified, of which 55 are very common, of which shortness of breath, palpitations, insomnia, anxiety, depression, all of these are very common now. And the fact that doctors in India just seem to say, why are you anxious? Like, for me, that's just bizarre. Like, I mean, the fact that I've had to advocate for myself to the point where I was sending research papers to my neurologist saying that, can you please look up if what I have is dysautonomia? I mean, come on, I'm not supposed to be telling you how to do your job, right? Like, it's just really bizarre. And the only reason Tanmay, I could do this was because I was part of patient groups, and I'm a health journalist, and I was following it, and I was understanding, okay, this is what's happening with me. And I could go and I could put my case forward. Otherwise, at every single point, I was told, ये तो anxiety की तरह लग रहा है. It can't be anxiety, right? And it was finally in September that I found this internal medicine doctor in Hyderabad. And he's a really good doctor. I think for me, what really came out from him, I told him, I was telling him, explaining all this, and I told him that, this is what the cardiologist thinks. She thinks it's anxiety. He says, okay, fine, you have anxiety. How did she help you with that? And to me, that is the crux of the point, right? You have a patient in front of you. You suspect that she has anxiety. What was your next step? You didn't even tell me, go get a psych eval. What she told me was drink water, sleep well, take these supplements. I mean, and then he says, no, let's figure out what's going on in your body. And he heard me and he said, I believe you. And for me, that moment just felt validating. Just the doctor telling, I believe that this is happening to you is enough. Like sometimes that's validating enough, because till that point, I thought I was losing my mind. I actually genuinely thought there is something, like I was like, oh my God, like, am I doing this to myself? Like, I was going on in this I went into my own whole spiral of, is this something that I'm doing to myself? Is this within my control? I'm drinking water, I'm taking salts, I'm wearing compression stockings, fir bhi kuch nahi ho raha hai. What is going on? And then he ran a battery of tests and then they find out that my adrenaline levels were very, very high. So high that the diagnostic center guy called me and asked me if I was taking any drugs. If I was taking any performing enhancing drugs, because that's the level it's there in sports people. And I was like, no, I'm not taking any performance enhancing drugs. And he goes, madam, you can tell me, I'll not tell anybody. And I'm like, no, but I'm not taking anything. Like,
holy crap.
I was like, what are you talking about? And then
when was this?
This was September of 2020. And he
so
freaked
about
out.
3-4 months after you got the virus.
Yeah. And I was like, why are you freaking out? Like, he sounded so freaked out. He freaked me out. And he was like, okay, ma'am, I'm sending you the test, but please go immediately to the doctor. The doctor looks at my test and he goes, this is not normal. This is extremely high. And that's when they suspected that it could be an adrenaline tumor. So, and I spent another 1 week, one nerve-wracking week, because, there was only one center in Hyderabad where this particular PET scan could be done. And I got an appointment for a week later. And I spent one nerve-wracking week thinking that it was an adrenaline tumor. And when the result came back negative, I think the doctor was more relieved than I was. He was like, oh my God, I'm so glad that it is not this. And that's when he said, I think you have something called as autonomic dysfunction. And he explained to me how my body was caught in the flight and fight mode. And I have something called as POTS, which is basically postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So every time I change my position, my heart rate goes up. My autonomic system is not working well. And he put me on some meds. And I think October, November, December, I was fairly okay. And then January onwards, it again started going downhill. And then I was sent to this, I went back to him because it was also my 3-month review. And he said, okay, I think it's better if you, and then he checked me. And then again, he said, yeah, your BP is dropping. This is crazy. Your orthostatic thing is very high. But then in March, I basically started having these fainting spells on a very abnormal level. Like I was actually in what is called as an autonomic crisis, an orthostatic hypotension crisis. But essentially every time I would change position, I was blacking out and I was having injuries. So I would just fall flat. And so it meant that somebody had to be around me 24/7. 24/7, I needed Rakesh or my parents around me. And that's when they were like, okay, it's better we admit you in the hospital and do these tests. And the brain PET scan actually revealed that some part of my brain was not functioning. Like there was some problem there. And then they were like, this looks like an autoimmune disease. And I was like, this is crazy. Like there is no history of autoimmune in my family. And I was like, and I kept saying, and I said, could this be because of COVID? Because by then, again, there was research coming out about long COVID mimicking autoimmune diseases. And I was like, is this like a post-viral thing? And the neuro wasn't sure. She couldn't give me a confident answer. But anyway, I mean, it was just horrific. Like all of to go through. And then April 2021, I got COVID again. And it was
that's when I started freaking out also, because I remember when you're going through the first phase. And you had already started talking a little bit about, these long COVID symptoms, etc. At that time, long COVID as a term itself was, it was just about catching on. And I don't think there was anybody else that I knew who was going through something as crazy and sinister as you were. But before we come to the second phase, did anybody else that or people on social media, etc., reach out to you saying that they were experiencing something similar with the medical system at that time?
I mean, once I put that Twitter thread out, I think I got a lot of people DMing me and messaging me, saying that reaching out to me through different forums, saying that this has been happening to me and the doctors don't know what this is. And someone was having a sugar spike, someone was having there was abnormality in their thyroid. I was being connected by other people saying that maybe talk to Priya, she can recommend you to, talk to some doctor, what to say to the doctor. And the overwhelming thing, the commonality was that every time they would go to the doctors, they would be told that this is part of the recovery and you're too anxious. And some people were put on antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds without being informed that they were being put on that. They send me prescription and I would look it up, and I would be like, have you been informed that this is an antidepressant or this is an anti-anxiety medicine? And they were like, no, what is this? Is this what it is? And it was just bizarre. How can you do that? How can you put a patient on anti-anxiety meds or antidepressants without informing them what that medicine is for? And I think there is so much of power imbalance. I have noticed, especially in India, between doctors and patients, where blindly the patients just trust the doctor, take it. They don't really ask the doctor questions. And if you do ask the doctor questions, very few doctors have honestly, the only term for it is honestly have the bedside manners to respond to you as an equal and answer your questions. Most of the time, they get very offended. They think that you're questioning their professionalism or their experience. They basically talk down to you. They talk at you. It's not even like talking to you. They talk at you. And they get really angry. And they almost say oh, are you questioning my, my experience of 20 years or 12 years? I'm like,
and this is not just to also sort of clarify, this is not just a COVID time phenomenon.
Absolutely. Oh my God, COVID, I went through this in 2012.
Right. And during COVID, we all understand that the medical fraternity, the medical community was increasingly, it was overwhelming for them. And I think, and we were all trying to rally behind the community as much as we could, because we understood.
Absolutely.
I come from my mother was a nurse for 30 years, so I get it completely. And I think this power imbalance is real. And in fact, I have heard from people that they were feeling so guilty about, adding to the burden of the medical system, that they would, if they could, they would not approach a doctor at all and just suffer in silence. Because they were reading about, there was all this talk of, how the system is collapsing and going home for days on end. And obviously people, even with clearly diagnosed symptoms, would feel a little hesitant to go and, burden the neighborhood GP with one more case. I know I went through that earlier this year. And then for somebody with mysterious symptoms who's already gotten, sort of poo-pooed by doctors, it must take a lot of internal resolve and just desperation to keep going back to the system and asking for help. How draining was that?
It was draining, but like you said, this was not the first time. It's not a COVID phenomenon at all. But I do think that I have a feeling that women get more medically gaslit than men, because there's this general belief, and this is a global thing. I mean, there are a lot of papers that have actually been written about this, how women of color and, otherwise women also overall are dismissed. And, there's this whole term of hysteria attached to it, like when you go with symptoms. But I remember in 2012, sorry, I'm just going back a bit, but in 2012, I had a condition called neurocysticercosis, which is basically I had tapeworm eggs going to my brain, and I got epilepsy. And I remember the second time I was in the ICU, and I basically, what had happened was that the neuros had overdosed me, and I was having fits because of the overdose, and not necessarily the thing had cleared, the eggs or whatever, the cysts had cleared, but I was having some side effects. And I remember the neuro asking me, like calling me aside after I got out of the ICU after 4 really traumatic days of ICU. I came out and they wheeled me into his room, into his chamber. They asked my parents and my husband to leave, and he closed the door and he asked me, "Is there something you want to tell me?" I said, "Tell you what?" And he said, "Are you faking your symptoms?" I was like a slap across my face. What? It was like such a big slap across my face. And I remember sitting there screaming and crying out of anger, out of sheer anger, that how could you ask me this? Like, why would I put myself through something so horrific as seizures, being admitted in ICU for 4 days, being force fed, those horrible IVs.
I'm so sorry.
And I was like, so this is not the first time this happened to me. And in fact, I have intense, because of that one experience, I actually hold off going to a doctor until and unless the symptoms get really unmanageable. Like, I actually try to manage my symptoms as much as I can. And that's what happened in January and February of this year. When I felt my body starting to crash, I had this guilt, one, that it's overburdened. And 2, I had this fear that I'll be dismissed and I'll be told that, you're faking it and kuch nahi hai. Until the whole crash happened in March, where they saw me physically just fainting every time, and they could record the blood pressure drop every time, like they literally found the proof, in the pudding in that manner. Until then, I was avoiding going to doctors. So the only thing that kept me going, Tanmoy, I'm not saying that I haven't had my days where I have not felt extreme, the only word I can use is distress, emotional distress. But I think the only thing that kept me going, honestly, to advocate for myself was, I was like, this is not right. Like, this is real. You cannot keep dismissing me. Like, this is real. This is happening to me. And it's happening to now many other people. And you just simply cannot dismiss me. You have to tell me. And if you don't know, just tell me you don't know. I would actually appreciate a doctor telling me, you know what, I don't know. There is so little literature on this. I would so much appreciate honesty, which my gynac did, frankly. Like, because my lot of women are facing, post-COVID, their menstrual cycles are going out of whack. And my gynac very honestly told me, I don't know what is happening. I don't know what's going on. There's so much little research on this. And I'm struggling to give answers to my patients. And it's very frustrating for me. Just that she's a human being. Connect to me at a human level, no? Like, and I think that's what honestly patients want, just that empathy, just being told sometimes by a doctor that, listen, this is a new disease. We are learning on the go. We don't know ourselves, but we'll try to help you as much as we can,
Yeah. I think this dual burden of being the patient and being an advocate, and, it's a consistent feature of the healthcare system, unfortunately, that patients have to do their own advocacy, especially those that live with invisible illnesses. And I think sort of this kind of experience really jolts one into understanding what chronic invisible conditions must be like. There are a lot of people now on social media who are talking about their own conditions. They have been gaslit for decades, some of them for their entire lives, not being taken seriously. And just the sheer trauma of it. And, you keep going back to the system and you keep getting re-traumatized every time you go there. So, tell me a little bit about what form is this advocacy taking now? And, how are you managing to do anything else? You are physically exhausted. I can vouch for it because I've been in touch with you the last few months. What does your day look like now? And you said you have some good weeks and some not so good weeks. You seem to have figured out a calculus of when your good weeks will be and when your bad weeks will be.
So now I know that my bad weeks are directly linked to my menstrual cycle. So 10 days before my periods, my body starts to, I start to have a flare up of all my symptoms again. So now,
and what symptoms are these right now?
So right now they are fainting spells, severe pain, chronic pain in the heels, and because there's blood pooling happening within the legs. So essentially, our body has to push. The blood goes anti-gravity, right? And in my body, that's not working. So the blood starts to pool within my feet, and I have to. If I have to sit for long, for example, if I have to do meetings and stuff, I have to wear abdominal compression so that the blood pools here, like stays here and does not go down, or I have to wear compression stockings. So I have figured out now ways to manage it. And frankly, I figured out ways to manage it because I spoke to some rehab specialists, which my friend connected me to. And then again, patient support groups for POTS. On a good day, I'm just doing now one task because I also have severe brain fog. And brain fog, to explain to people who read or listen to this, is essentially you cannot focus, you cannot concentrate. Everything feels fuzzy. I've had also symptoms of blurred vision. So I basically, when I'm having a bad day, I rest, I read if I can read, or I listen to music or podcast, or I sleep. Frankly, that's all I do. On a good day, I do one task. Like for today, my one task was to speak to you, and I did not plan anything else. That's it. Like one task was just this, and I did not plan anything else for the calendar because I know how much my body can take now. Like how much work can I get done? So it's usually 2 hours in a day that I can work. And I try to do that work within those 2 hours. And even that's not continuous 2 hours. It's spread over the day. Like, it's maybe half an hour in the night and half an hour in the morning or half an hour in the afternoon, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
For my mind, because now I have severe anxiety and depression, to deal with that, I have turned to coloring. So I've picked up pastels and I've found that I'm not so bad at it actually. And I'm learning art. So that's really helping me a lot. So that's essentially, and I spend time with my kid. So she's my, as much as I can, I spend time with her. So
yeah.
My family.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel both very thankful and also very awful that talking to me is your one task for today, and you probably
don't feel awful. I feel good about it. Nothing to feel awful.
And I know we've been kind of trying to do this for a while, and actually both the occasions when we planned this, on both those occasions, Padma had to be rushed to the hospital, and it was quite horrifying for me to just even watch from the sidelines. So I'm so glad that you are. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to call any of this bravery because this is a forced choice. It's not something that anybody wishes to gallantly take on. And I really hope that this gets over soon for you. Tell me, you've been doing a lot of research. You already several times referred to the research that you've done. Is this something that you once the fog lifts and you hopefully start feeling better, is this an area of work that you think should continue in some way, advocacy for? Because COVID is not going away anytime soon completely. And I guess people with these kind of symptoms will continue. So what as a community can we collectively do so that, this doesn't happen to too many other people?
The point that you spoke about, this chronic invisible illnesses, it's very interesting because, we had done this 2 seasons on rare diseases in India, or people with rare diseases.
And you should check that out, by the way, on Suno.
They're called Rare Lives. And whenever we would be in production and when I'd be listening to these stories, I would be like, oh my God, these people are around us and we don't even seem to know these kind of struggles. And you realize how much of invisibilization has actually happened. And then when long COVID hit, you see the people from the ME and CFS. So this is the chronic fatigue syndrome and the myalgic encephalitis syndrome communities, them screaming, saying that this is why we've been asking you to do more research into this, because for all of them, it's been for this community of people with, now I have CFS, I have been diagnosed with CFS also, chronic fatigue syndrome. And for people, and this is something that is always happens usually post any viral illness, any kind of viral illness. And there have been a lot of studies, say after chikungunya, after Ebola, after dengue, of people having these long sort of illnesses, but they were never called long COVID or long chikungunya or long whatever, they were always called post-viral illnesses, and there was not enough investment done. But I think in a pandemic as huge as this, and now because you're talking about just, I think in the UK, the scale at which they're expecting is somewhere in the range of 150,000 odd people to have long COVID. And for their population, that's a huge number, right? Just in one country. And you're talking about, we don't even know what the scale is in India because nobody is really looking at it into it as yet. So I feel like I feel like the advocacy needs to happen, but I think it cannot just be from patient side. I think we need more doctors and researchers jumping on board, supporting us. I mean, I have started this Telegram group just so that people know that they're not alone. They're not, imagining these symptoms. And there are some 300, I think close to 350 people now in it. And the common thread again, Tanmoy, is that so many of them are being dismissed as being told as anxiety or as insomnia or having, and these are people who have also lost loved ones, right? And I feel, and this is where like we had some people join in from the medical community, and I told them like, please, like if you're here, please like talk to us, help us with like if you're doing surveys, talk to patients. If you're doing research, talk to patients, reach out to us. Even before you start a questionnaire, talk to patients. Because I think it's important. Like, and I think that this has to continue. I think this has to continue for a very long time. And not just for long COVID, like I said. I think for all chronic invisible illnesses, there needs to be more looked into it, especially if it's being driven by viruses. Because we know now the next big thing is climate change, and climate change is going to push out more viruses to come out. So it's better to be prepared from even a planetary health and public health perspective, right? Than just saying that, oh, but we don't know what this is. What's for me very upsetting, I can tell you, is the fact that there are no guidelines yet out in India for long COVID. Like, I think doctors need help too, because they are overburdened. They are looking at COVID. They're looking at other non-communicable diseases. They're looking at TB. I mean, they're looking at a plethora of diseases. So you need to help them, put out some guidelines, tell them that, say, these 55 odd symptoms could be post-COVID, open up more post-COVID clinics. I'm not saying burden the doctors and nurses more, but then hire more doctors, just figure out a system so that people feel heard, right? Like there was supposed to be a directory for long COVID. I don't know what happened to it. There was supposed to be a post-COVID clinic in AIIMS. I don't know what happened to it, because people come in the group asking, where do we go? Like, and it's always in the private sector, and it is so expensive. It is so expensive. I have exhausted all my savings this year. All my savings are gone because of COVID, long COVID. Like, it's gone. I don't have a penny left in terms of savings. So it's very difficult. And this is like maxed out on insurance. And I'm speaking from a very privileged space. So just imagine somebody sitting in, I don't know where, like Warangal or, a smaller town like Kurnool. They won't even know what's happening to them. They will just be like, have water, take salt, eat food.
Be confident.
Yeah.
Padma, I don't know how you managed to talk about all of this with equanimity and
without crying and without ranting.
Yes, very articulate, very coherent, almost like a dissertation. And I have no words except to just send you a big hug and
thank you. Yeah.
I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation. And this time, I mean, I thought I was jinxing it for you, because every time you were planning this,
no,
you ended up in the hospital, and it was an awkward feeling. I'm sorry. I'm not. Yeah.
No, I know. I understand. No. This is the
there
thing.
Is
like,
no funny side to this.
No, I know, of course. No, but I'm learning to also laugh about it. Like, I've discovered a entire community in Instagram for POTS. So POTS support POTS patients, and the way with which, and they're much younger, like, and they got it like,
POTS
some of the,
what?
This is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Okay. So the dysautonomia part of it. So, and these are such young people. Some of them got it when they were 13, or some of them, they're like 20 years old. Not all of them got it because of COVID. And with the humor with which they handle it, it's amazing. And they're all using Instagram to advocate, for other people to talk about it. And actually, I feel like they have given me a lot of courage, I feel like organizations like Dysautonomia International, you should look them up. They're doing such incredible work, just in also like telling people like this happens, and they go train doctors about it. There are now communities also in India that are coming up. And I feel like, we need this. We need more empathy. This doctor that I found in Kochi, like he gets what I'm going through, because he's an autonomic specialist. And when I was telling him this is what everyone's saying, everyone's telling me to go get a psych eval. He laughed and he said, I understand. And he said, I'm not laughing at you, but I'm just frustrated because this is a subject that needs so much more talking about and research. And and he said, I understand your frustration, and I get I totally get it as a patient what you're going through. And I just feel like, I don't know. I mean, I've now learned to laugh. Like I crack jokes on this. Like now, there are these funny memes. They get me through some really bad days. I mean, some of these funny memes really get me through some bad days. On how like salt is like our best friend. Like, there'll be like memes of people sitting just eating pickles. This is what we have to do, if we have to stay upright. But it's okay. It's I think I'm learning to manage it and learning to cope with it. Some days it gets very distressing, and those days I learn to take a breather and learn to be compassionate to myself. I think that's been for me the biggest learning in these 1.5 years, where I was this workaholic productivity horse, and now all that has come to like a halting stop, and I have had to learn to prioritize. I've had to learn to say no, very hard no's. Even though I would love the project, I have to say no, I can't do this. And just give time to myself. I think I just didn't honestly give that time to myself, and all that is now I'm just taking it as, okay, I have time to do other things. Honestly, I wouldn't have picked up pastels otherwise. So only for that I will thank COVID.
Right. There you have it. 2-time COVID survivor and advocate and newly minted painter. Padma, thank you so much. This was incredible.
Thank you, Tanmoy.
And I hope this evil, vile thing stays very far away from you. And be well. Be well, and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Tanmoy.
Thank you.